Every society has its strange jobs. But the Soviet Union wasn't just strange. It was a masterpiece of institutional absurdity. The professions it spawned weren't just odd. They were symptoms of a system so fundamentally broken, it required professional line standers and official applause starters just to keep up appearances. Today, we explore 44 careers so bizarre, so illogical, they could only exist in a world built on paranoia, propaganda, and scarcity. 1. Imagine a job where your only required skill is the ability to stand completely still for a painfully long time, powered by pure desperation. This was the professional queue stander, a human placeholder in a country that had more lines than products. You'd literally pay this urban warrior to sacrifice their own existence, standing for hours in the freezing cold or summer heat, just to secure your chance to maybe buy a questionable sausage or a pair of shoes. It was the original gig economy, but infinitely more depressing and with zero chance of a 5-star rating. They weren't just saving you time, they were absorbing the soul-crushing boredom of a failed system on your behalf for a small fee. 2. Meet the Tolkach, or pusher. The officially unofficial criminal whose job was to make communism actually function. In theory, the grand economic plan allocated every single nut and bolt. In reality, the plan was a work of fiction. So when a factory needed a part that didn't exist on paper, they sent in the pusher. This guy was a corporate raider with a Communist Party membership, traveling the country with a suitcase full of cash and liquid negotiation, also known as premium cognac. He bribed, charmed, and blackmailed other factory managers to get what he needed. He was the essential bug in the system's code, a walking contradiction that kept the whole absurd machine from grinding to a halt. 3. Behold, the fearsome neighborhood god of the recycling bin, the glass Terra collector. This wasn't some friendly environmental initiative. This was a high-stakes power trip disguised as a job. This person, sitting in their tiny kiosk, held your family's discretionary income in the palm of their hand. They were the ultimate judge of your empty milk bottles and pickle jars, wielding the power to reject your entire week's collection because of a microscopic chip only they could see. In an instant, your hopes of affording an extra loaf of bread could be shattered by this tyrant of transparency, the undisputed and often terrifying gatekeeper of kopecks. 4. This next job was essentially a bioweapon delivery specialist disguised as a beverage technician, the soda water machine attendant. These street-side machines offered a splash of syrupy joy, but with a horrifying twist. The attendant's job involved servicing the machine and, most importantly, managing its single, solitary, communal drinking glass. That's right, one glass. For the entire neighborhood. This brave attendant was tasked with giving this chalice of communism an occasional, purely symbolic rinse before the next 1,000 people used it. It was less about hygiene and more about building a citywide superimmune system, one sip of a bacterial cocktail at a time. 5. In a world of relentless gray conformity, the Fartsovschik was a high-risk fashion messiah and a black market rock star. This was the guy who brought color to a monochrome world. His job was to loiter around tourist hotels and hunt for Westerners, ready to trade precious Soviet souvenirs for the holy relics of capitalism. Real blue jeans, forbidden Marlboro cigarettes, rock and roll vinyl records. His most absurdly prized commodity? A branded plastic shopping bag. Owning one was the ultimate status symbol. This guy wasn't just a criminal, he was the sole provider of cool for an entire generation, a secret agent of style in the war against drabness. 6. Forget kings or party officials. One of the most powerful people in any Soviet city was the guy behind the meat counter. This wasn't a butcher, he was the feudal lord of a fiefdom of fat and gristle. In an economy where meat was a currency more stable than the ruble, this man was the central bank. He alone decided your culinary destiny. Would you get the prime cuts for a bribe, or would you be sent home with a bag of bones to boil for a week? He wielded his meat cleaver like a royal scepter, creating a complex underground economy of favors and debts. Access to protein was power, And this guy was the gloriously grumpy, all-powerful gatekeeper. 7. Meet the master of liquid alchemy, a street-level magician whose greatest trick was turning beer into, well, mostly water. This was the unofficial but incredibly common job of the beer and kvass diluter. These mobile vendors would roll out their big barrels on a hot day, but their real skill wasn't in bartending. It was in creative accounting with a hose. Their most essential tool was a hidden bucket and a complete lack of shame. They would secretly dilute their product throughout the day, magically stretching one barrel's worth of profit into two. They were selling the idea of beer, a vaguely fermented memory of a drink, to thirsty customers who were often too desperate to care. 8. Imagine getting paid to clap. That's it. That was the entire job description for the claker, or the professional applauder. These were acoustic mercenaries hired to sit in the audience of party congresses and theatrical premieres. When a high-ranking official finished a mind-numbingly boring speech about tractor production, it was the claker's cue to leap to their feet and initiate a wave of rapturous applause. Their job was to transform polite, obligatory pattering into a thunderous, minutes-long standing ovation, creating a completely fabricated illusion of unanimous, passionate support for the cameras. It was the ultimate performance art in the service of total absurdity. 9. If you thought your neighbor was nosy, meet the postal censor, a professional whose entire job was to be the state-sponsored master of reading other people's mail. This wasn't just a quick glance for contraband. This was a deep dive into your soul. In hidden back rooms of post offices, these spies for the state would meticulously steam open private letters, photograph them, and read every single word. They were hunting for anything from anti-Soviet poetry to a complaint about the price of cabbage. Then, with the skill of a surgeon, they'd reseal the envelope, sending it on its way. It's the ultimate invasion of privacy, performed as a boring 9-to-5 bureaucratic task. 10. In every Soviet factory and office, there was a mandatory shrine to the state called the Red Corner, and someone had the glorious full-time job of being its manager. This was the curator of communism, the official keeper of the ideological flame. Their critical duties included dusting the portraits of Lenin and other stern-looking men, arranging propaganda pamphlets in a slightly different but equally uninteresting order, and ensuring the official state newspaper wasn't displaying yesterday's lies. It was a position of immense responsibility if you cared about the structural integrity of a small bookshelf, a job that perfectly symbolized the system's love for pointless administration. 11. Picture a stand-up comedian whose material is entirely state-approved economic theory. That was the propaganda lecturer for the Znani, or Knowledge Society. These intellectual mercenaries were sent on tour to remote collective farms and factories to deliver mind-numbingly dull lectures on topics like the geopolitical advantages of socialism in Mozambique, or the moral bankruptcy of Western jazz. Their real talent wasn't in education, but in their uncanny ability to speak for an hour to a room full of people who were either asleep or actively praying for the sweet release of the factory whistle. 12. If you ever feel like your job is pointless, just remember the Soviet Union created the escalator monitor. This person would sit in a small glass booth for an 8-hour shift with one single, solitary, mind-shattering task: to watch people ride an escalator. It is perhaps the most beautifully absurd and useless job ever conceived by a bureaucracy. Their entire professional existence revolved around observing a machine that operated itself. Occasionally, they would lean into a microphone to deliver a life-altering announcement like, "Citizens, please hold the handrail," shattering the existential silence with a blast of profound pointlessness. 13. Checking into a Soviet hotel meant surrendering your freedom to the floor matron, the designaya. This woman was not a concierge. She was the warden of her hallway, a terrifying hybrid of a security guard, a KGB informant, and your most judgmental aunt. She held your room key hostage, meaning you had to ask her permission to enter your own room. She monitored every person who came and went, interrogated your guests, and documented any activity that looked remotely like fun. She was the undisputed, iron-fisted queen of her corridor, ensuring that your state-approved vacation remained completely, miserably, and unfailingly state-approved. 14. Long before corporate newsletters, there was the wall newspaper editor, a combination of journalist, artist, and propagandist for a single office department. This person's entire media empire was one large piece of paper tacked to a wall. They were responsible for creating the Stengazeta, a handmade bulletin featuring heroic poems about exceeding the monthly quota for paperclips, flattering profiles of diligent workers, and, best of all, vicious satirical cartoons mocking lazy colleagues by name. It was like a public shaming board combined with a kindergarten art project, all produced with the seriousness of a national publication. 15. Here's a career for someone with a very specific and very resilient superpower, the egg sniffer. Before automated quality control, this person's sole duty at a poultry factory was to protect the nation from bad breakfasts. They stood over conveyor belts loaded with thousands of eggs and used their highly trained nose to sniff out any rotten ones. With a single, expert whiff, they could detect the faintest hint of sulfur and remove the offender. It was a disgusting, yet strangely heroic role. They were the silent guardians of the Soviet omelet, the unsung heroes of the egg carton, wielding their sense of smell as a weapon for the common good. 16. In the age before you could just hit Ctrl+C, the Soviet Union had a human photocopier known as the blueprint tracer. This job required the patience of a meditating monk and the steady hands of a brain surgeon. A tracer would spend their days in a silent institute, painstakingly redrawing impossibly complex architectural or engineering plans onto special paper. One accidental coffee spill or a sudden sneeze could alter the design of an entire city block or send a new missile design askew. It was a career of immense pressure and responsibility, combined with the pulse-pounding excitement of watching grass grow. 17. Before they had the good sense to strap dogs into rockets, the Soviets first needed to see what would break a human. For this, they created the job of human guinea pig for the space program. This wasn't about glorious spaceflight. It was about brutal, earthbound science. Your job was to test the absolute limits of human endurance. You'd be spun in a giant centrifuge until you blacked out, locked in a tiny soundproof room for months to simulate isolation, and be forced to eat bizarre nutritional pastes that tasted like despair. You were a crash test dummy for the cosmos, a living experiment whose only purpose was to see what part of you would fail first, all for the glory of the motherland. 18. Imagine going on a state-mandated vacation to a health resort, only to be relentlessly hunted down by a person whose job is to force you to have fun. Meet the Masovik Zatanik, the state-appointed chief of fun. This hyper-energetic entertainer was tasked with a relentless program of mandatory leisure. They would drag you out of bed for morning exercises, bully you into a chess tournament, and lead you in patriotic sing-alongs. Relaxation was not on the agenda. Fun was a quota that had to be met, and this person was the foreman making sure you did your part. It was the most exhausting form of rest ever invented. 19. The Soviet Union had a special kind of Uber, but it only picked you up when you were passed out drunk in public, and the destination was always a state-run house of pain. This was the work of the sobering-up station crewman. The crew of the Vitrezvitel van would patrol the city, scooping up clients who had overindulged in vodka. The all-inclusive package at their facility included a freezing cold shower, a hard bed in a shared room, and, to top it all off, a hefty fine and a formal notice sent to your workplace. It was a unique public service that combined emergency medical care with public shaming. 20. For the average Soviet citizen, the most terrifying figure of authority wasn't a KGB agent, but the public transport ticket controller. These were the stone-faced villains of the daily commute. They would board a bus or tram, block the exits like a SWAT team, and instill pure, primal fear in everyone. Their mission was to hunt down hares, the daring souls trying to ride for free. The public confrontations that followed were legendary. A high-stakes theatrical performance over a ticket that cost mere kopecks. It was a bizarre daily drama where a simple bus ride could turn into a battle for your honor and your wallet. 21. Want to call your grandma in another city? First, you had to make an appointment with the inner-city manual telephone operator, a human router who controlled the nation's conversations. This wasn't instant communication, it was a bureaucratic process. You'd book your call, then wait hours for the operator to work her magic. You had to imagine this person sitting before a massive switchboard that looked like a mad scientist computer, frantically plugging and unplugging cables to connect your city to another. The grand result of all this effort? A faint, crackly voice from hundreds of miles away that sounded like it was coming from the moon. 22. Every kid dreams of having a job at an arcade, but the Soviet version was slightly less glamorous. Meet the arcade machine coin collector. This person had the keys to the kingdom of charmingly clunky Soviet games like Sea Battle or Sniper. But their job wasn't playing. It was hauling. They would make the rounds to cinemas and parks with a huge empty bag and return with it full of massive, heavy 15 kopeck coins. They were essentially a low-rent casino manager, a strongman whose primary task was wrestling with the sheer weight of a nation's pocket change, all earned one clunky, pixelated torpedo at a time. 23. Before you could just grab a Perrier, making fizzy water at home involved a dedicated piece of tech and a trip to a specialist who operated what looked like a small explosive device. This was the home siphon refiller. Families had these cool, reusable metal siphons, but when the gas ran out, you had to take it to a special depot. There, a worker would connect your personal bottle to a high-pressure CO2 tank in a loud, slightly terrifying process that seemed wildly industrial for a simple beverage. It was a job that turned the simple desire for some bubbles into an encounter with heavy-duty machinery. 24. In the vast, isolated countryside, he was a god who arrived in a van. The mobile cinema mechanic was a cultural hero whose job was to bring the magic of film to remote, collective farms. His van was a rolling treasure chest, equipped with a projector, speakers, and reels of the latest propaganda-filled blockbuster. But he wasn't just a projectionist, he was an emergency technician. His most common task was setting up a bedsheet for a screen, and then, when the ancient projector inevitably broke down mid-film, frantically trying to fix it while the entire village stared at him in judgmental silence. 25. Step right up and witness the incredible human PowerPoint presentation, a job that was the pinnacle of Soviet-era multimedia entertainment. This was the diafilm narrator and operator. In schools and kindergartens across the nation, this person would operate a simple projector to show diafilms, glorified film strips with still images and text captions. Their job was to be the entire audio-visual experience. They manually advanced each frame while reading the story aloud, with as much dramatic flair as they could muster. It was the analog version of a streaming service, but with a high probability of the film being loaded upside down, and the only special effect being the operator's theatrical sneeze. 26. This next job proves that in the Soviet Union, even your office equipment could be a suspected enemy of the state. Meet the typewriter repairman with security clearance. This wasn't just a technical gig. It was a position of immense trust, requiring a background check from the KGB itself. Why? Because every single typewriter was seen as a potential weapon for printing illegal anti-government texts. This repairman wasn't just fixing sticky keys. He was a vetted agent, expected to report any suspicious activity, like a customer asking for a non-standard font or typing out rebellious poetry instead of production reports. He was the IT guy with a license to snitch. 27. Before the age of silicon chips and quiet laptops, there was the punch card machine operator, the high priest of the original deafeningly loud computer center. This specialist worked in a massive room filled with room-sized machines that sounded like 1,000 filing cabinets falling down a flight of stairs, forever. Their critical job was to feed meticulously ordered stacks of punch cards, tiny paper rectangles with holes in them, into these mechanical beasts. These cards contained the data for everything from the national census to the 5-year economic plan. One spilled coffee or a single card out of place could cause a catastrophic error, proving that the entire Soviet economy was perilously balanced on pieces of perforated paper. 28. If you thought your office was cold, try being an Antarctic polar explorer, or polyarctic. The state propaganda machine sold this job as a heroic, romantic adventure to conquer the icy frontier for Soviet science. The reality was a year-long contract to endure unimaginable punishment. You were shipped to an isolated research station to face months of total, unbroken darkness, mind-numbing boredom, and temperatures that made Siberia look tropical. It was one of the most prestigious and well-paid jobs available, but the price was your sanity and the feeling in your toes. You were a hero of the nation, but you'd probably trade all the glory for a single glimpse of the sun. 29. This wasn't a shop clerk. This was a gatekeeper to a forbidden paradise of consumerism. The Berioska foreign currency shop clerk worked in a parallel universe. These elite stores were stocked with high-quality goods and Western luxuries, real jeans, French perfume, American cigarettes, but you couldn't just buy them. They were sold only for foreign currency or special government certificates, making them completely inaccessible to ordinary citizens. The clerk's job was to serve the party elite, diplomats, and foreign tourists, spending their day surrounded by treasures that the average person outside could only dream of, basking in the glow of capitalist goods while enforcing a system of socialist inequality. 30. Imagine being a tour guide whose primary duty is not to show tourists your country, but to meticulously hide most of it from them. That was the bizarre dual role of the in-tourist guide and chaperone. On the surface, they were the friendly, smiling face of the USSR, showing visitors a carefully curated, sanitized version of reality along a strict, pre-approved route. But their second secret job was to be a KGB informant. After a long day of deflecting awkward questions and praising model factories, they would go home and write detailed reports on the tourists' conversations, attitudes, and every single suspicious photograph taken. It was the ultimate job in hospitality and espionage. 31. The Soviet Union fiercely claimed it had no professional athletes, only dedicated amateurs. To pull off this magnificent lie on the world stage, they invented one of the most absurd fake jobs in history: the professional athlete as instructor. An Olympic weightlifting champion, for instance, would be officially employed as a sports instructor at a steel mill or in the Red Army. They would collect a full salary, have an official title, and be listed on the payroll. The only catch? They never ever showed up for work. Their entire job was to be a ghost employee, allowing them to train full-time while the state could honestly, with a straight face, say they were just a humble factory worker. 32. In a nation that proudly offered free healthcare for all, one of the most profitable black market professions was the underground dentist. This wasn't because people enjoyed breaking the law. It was because the official state dental care was a house of horrors, often involving primitive equipment and a stoic belief that anesthesia was for the weak. This created a thriving illegal industry of dentists, often state doctors working after hours, who ran secret clinics in their apartments. They used smuggled Western materials and painkillers that actually worked. Finding one was like a spy mission, but it was worth it to avoid having a cavity filled with cement by a man who looked bored. 33. Imagine being an actor so incredibly typecast that your entire professional range is limited to one specific dead revolutionary. That was the shockingly stable career of the Lenin lookalike actor. If you were born with the unfortunate or fortunate genetic lottery ticket of resembling Vladimir Lenin, you had a job for life. You were the go-to guy for every historical film, every revolutionary stage play, and every grand state pageant. Your craft wasn't about emotional depth. It was about mastering a determined facial expression and perfecting a goatee. It was the ultimate creative prison, but a surprisingly safe one, where your main professional worry was not gaining weight and accidentally becoming a slightly chubbier father of the revolution. 34. If you thought modern corporate team-building exercises were a soul-crushing waste of time, allow me to introduce you to their glorious Soviet ancestor, the Socialist Competition Organizer. This was a full-time bureaucrat whose entire job was to invent and manage fake competitions between factory departments to motivate people who were already supposed to be motivated by the workers' paradise they lived in. This person would spend their days designing elaborate wall charts with tiny drawings of tractors, awarding pathetic red pennants for overfulfilling the quota, and celebrating the Brigade of Communist Labor. It was the gamification of misery, a job created to solve a morale problem that the system itself manufactured daily. 35. This was a job for a highly skilled artist with an extremely limited and repetitive portfolio. Meet the parade banner painter, the Michelangelo of the Politburo. This artist's career peaked exactly twice a year, for the massive May Day and October Revolution parades. Their sole artistic mission was to paint the gigantic, heroic, and frankly terrifying portraits of Marx, Engels, and Lenin, which had to be perfect. One misplaced brushstroke and suddenly Marx looks more confused than revolutionary. They also painted the massive red banners with gold leaf slogans. It was an incredibly high-pressure gig where artistic freedom was forbidden, and your primary client was the all-seeing state, which was notoriously difficult to please. 36. The Soviet Union was a master of marketing, especially when selling a job that was almost guaranteed to be a miserable experience. The grand prize for this deception went to the Baikal-Amur mainline builder. The propaganda sold it as a romantic, heroic quest for young communists to conquer the Siberian wilderness, complete with inspiring songs and poems. The reality was a one-way ticket to a frozen hell. The job was brutally difficult manual labor, building a massive railway through impenetrable swamps, solid permafrost, and mountains, all while being eaten alive by swarms of mosquitoes. Young people were lured by slogans of adventure, but were met with extreme hardship, proving that the toughest thing they conquered was profound disappointment. 37. In the great industrial struggle between worker safety and relentless pollution, the Soviet Union's surprising solution was not better ventilation, but milk. This led to the creation of the Milk for Harmfulness Specialist, a job that was a monument to bureaucratic procedure and questionable science. In hazardous factories, workers were entitled to a daily ration of milk, which was believed to magically counteract the effects of inhaling toxic chemicals. And one person's entire job was to manage this dairy-based defense program. They kept meticulous records and handed out the cartons, a dairy distributing administrator for a state-sponsored superstition, proving that sometimes the solution to a problem is to create an even more absurd job. 38. Forget the gold rush. In the Soviet Union, the wildest prospecting job involved hunting for the remains of prehistoric monsters. This was the work of the mammoth tusk hunter, a uniquely Siberian profession that was part adventure, part paleontology, and part black market enterprise. These incredibly rugged individuals would venture deep into the tundra, waiting for the melting permafrost to reveal the gigantic, curved tusks of mammoths that died thousands of years ago. This Ice Age ivory was incredibly valuable and could make a person rich overnight, but it was a high-risk game of finders keepers against the state. It was a job straight out of a fantasy novel, but with much higher stakes and significantly more frostbite. 39. While most Soviet citizens were fantasizing about the taste of basic sausage, one person had a job that sounds like a parody of luxury. This was the caviar quality control specialist, an elite expert whose tongue was a strategic national asset. Stationed at the state fisheries on the Caspian Sea, this person's palate was the final judge of the world's most prized black caviar. They would taste tiny samples from massive batches, grading them on flavor, saltiness, and the signature texture. A single bad call could ruin a shipment worth a fortune in foreign currency. It was a career of incredible privilege, deciding which tins were good enough for the Kremlin's table and which were merely good enough for rich capitalists abroad. 40. Worried that not enough people will be audibly devastated at your funeral? In the Soviet Union, particularly in rural regions, there was a professional service for that. Meet the professional mourner, or plakalshchitsa. This was not a subtle, quiet performance. For a fee, these women, who were masters in the art of performative grief, would attend a funeral and unleash a torrent of loud, dramatic, and ritualized wailing. They were grief actors, hired to ensure the deceased received a send-off with the appropriate level of acoustic sorrow. It was a bizarrely practical job that guaranteed your funeral wouldn't be an awkward, quiet affair, turning a personal tragedy into a full-blown theatrical production. 41. And now for perhaps the single most bizarre scientific career on planet Earth, a job that blurs the line between state preservation and high-tech necromancy. Meet Lenin's body maintenance technician. In a secret Lenin laboratory in the heart of Moscow, a dedicated team of elite scientists and technicians had one continuous, never-ending mission: to keep the embalmed body of Vladimir Lenin looking fresh and presentable for his public display in the mausoleum. This wasn't a one-time job. It was a perpetual process of chemical treatments, resuturing, managing the perfect lighting and temperature, and basically performing revolutionary skincare on a corpse. It was the ultimate make-work project, a career in post-mortem cosmetology with zero margin for error. 42. If you're looking for a job with high stakes and absolutely no possibility of a promotion, look no further than the Kremlin food taster. In the intensely paranoid world of the Soviet leadership, especially under Joseph Stalin, this was a life-or-death position. A highly trusted doctor or security officer had the unenviable duty of tasting every single dish and drink prepared for the leader, just moments before it was served. Your entire job description was to be a human poison detector. A single bite of a poisoned chicken cutlet and your career was over permanently. It was a position of immense trust built on the absolute certainty that everyone was trying to kill your boss, and it had the worst possible consequence for a bad day at the office. 43. This wasn't a job about cutting hair. It was a job about being granted access to the deepest secrets of the empire, all while holding a sharp pair of scissors. This was the party-appointed hairdresser for the elite. The person who trimmed the hair of a high-ranking party official, or their wife wasn't just good at their craft. They were a thoroughly vetted and trusted individual with security clearance. They were invited into private homes and country dakas, making them a fly on the wall for the most private gossip, family dramas, and political backstabbing. They were privy to information that could make or break careers, proving that the most influential person in the room might just be the one with the comb and a can of hairspray. 44. Meet the official gatekeeper of culture, a person whose job was to protect the entire Soviet population from the corrupting influence of a well-shot movie. This was the official film censor. These eagle-eyed bureaucrats would watch Western films that the state had acquired and then meticulously decide which scenes had to be destroyed. A kiss that was deemed too long, a kitchen that looked too nice, any mention of religion, or even a shot of a car that was too flashy would all be ruthlessly snipped out by the censor's scissors. Their job was to systematically butcher foreign art to ensure that Soviet audiences would never be exposed to the dangerous idea that people in other countries might actually be happy, wealthy, or in love. And there you have it, a workforce built not on innovation, but on paranoia, scarcity, and breathtaking absurdity. It proves that when a system fails, it doesn't just collapse, it gets weird. So here's the real question for the comments, and don't be diplomatic. Would you have taken a morally corrupt but comfortable job like a censor or Bureaucratic clerk, becoming part of the system to thrive? Or would you have chosen an honest, miserable job just to stay out of it? Who would you really have been? Let the debate begin. And if your mind is still blown, destroy the like button and subscribe for more historical insanity.